Welcome to the press preview then. A first look at what's in tomorrow's newspapers as they come into us. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Deputy Political Editor of HuffPost UK, Owen Bennett, and News Editor at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Kate Andrews. Before we get stuck into those, let's see what's on some of those front pages for you. So Theresa May tells the EU that the ball is in their court over the Brexit negotiations, according to The Times. That story is also on the front of the Express, which says the PM is becoming increasingly frustrated with the slow pace of the talks. It's another Brexit story. In The Guardian, they're reporting that Philip Hammond and his department have come under fire for being too gloomy over Britain's departure from the EU. The I newspaper reporting that Mrs May has threatened to remove Boris Johnson from the Foreign Office as she tries to reassert her authority over the party. The Telegraph leads with a story about the new pound coin, saying thousands of shops and businesses are planning to continue accepting the old ones even after they cease to be legal tender. That happens next Sunday. The FT reports on the hundreds of thousands of people who marched in Barcelona today, calling for Catalonia not to break away from Spain. While the Mail reports that the Office for National Statistics is considering making it optional for people to declare their sex in the next census. The Mirror leads with a story about rubbish collection, saying people are turning to private firms to collect their waste. And The Sun has a report on airline staff playing pranks as they carry out repairs to Ryanair planes. The Star has a story about Louise Redknapp. So we're joined by Owen Bennett and Kate Andrews. Good to see you both. Let's get stuck into the meaty ones that are all about the tussling at the top of the Tory party and how it will affect Brexit. So let's start with the I. Owen, Theresa May fights back. Still threatening Boris with the sack? Are we still there, or is that over now?
I don't think she's going to sack him. I mean, I think what she should do is promote him somehow. I would put him really close. I would hold him in such an embrace, and no matter what happened with Brexit, he would be tainted with it through the ages, so that everyone knew that the Brexit deal we get was signed off by Boris Johnson.
This is Owen's way of saying he just really wants to give Boris Johnson a hug.
I do not want to give Boris Johnson
a hug.
No, but I think it's interesting that she's in a position now where obviously Boris kind of wants to be sacked, right? Boris kind of wants to be able to walk away, and he wants to be able to go into his Winston Churchill gathering storm kind of period on the back benches where he can give all these fantastic speeches about if only they'd listened to me, the country would be in a great state. Whereas actually, he needs to stay in the cabinet because he needs to take some responsibility for Brexit. He was the one who campaigned for it, so I think she should keep him there. I think she will.
Kate, on a couple of the papers tomorrow, rather, it says that he would turn down any move anyway. Can she move him anywhere, really, if she wanted to?
Well, she could. The headlines here, May fights back as if she's bringing the fight to Boris, but really it should be May holds on. The clock has been ticking since June, really, in terms of her tenure as being Prime Minister. So now the question is, how far can she get? I don't think the cough is going to actually be what does her in the end. But, there are people waiting there who want to take her job. No question about it. And I agree with Owen, it's not necessarily a good idea to give them the opportunity to become stronger in their opposition voice, especially when they're not the opposition. Jeremy Corbyn is supposed to be her opposition, and as we saw from poll numbers today, he is getting stronger and stronger. Looking
a similar story at the front page, the inside page of The Sun, should he stay or should he go? Owen, you think there's still this tussle going on between Boris and his allies and the Chancellor Philip Hammond. That's still in play?
Yeah, I mean, you saw at the front of The Guardian as well that a lot of Brexiteers, even the ones who aren't particularly Boris fans, are very angry with Philip Hammond, really angry with the Treasury, think they're scuppering Brexit, think this transition period is going to go on forever, think we're going to be permanently following the rules set out by the ECJ, all that kind of stuff. So actually there is a sense that it's going to be, well, if you get rid of Boris, you'll get rid of Philip Hammond as well. Let's, one of yours and one of ours. It's interesting, they've got a list here of potential people they could promote. She wants to freshen up. She's got Dominic Raab, Brexiteer. She's got Joe Johnson. Would you really want to give another Johnson a senior role in the cabinet? I'm not sure about that. And you've got James Cleverly, who's quite outspoken. You've got Tom Tugendhat, who's just been appointed chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. If you're any of these people, why would you want to get involved in the cabinet now? I mean, it's a cabinet that's going down.
That's exactly the point. If you have real ambition to be, whether you want to be the top dog or you want to be in leadership in some capacity, you really want May to continue to be that sacrificial lamb in some respects, just to take all the burden upon herself, whether that be Brexit, whether that be the state of the Conservative Party, so that when she goes, there could be some element of a clean start.
Before she does go, if she does, she's going to have to get back onto the Brexit talks. Just before we look back inside The Sun, let's look at the front page of the Express. The ball is in the EU's court. Now, this is her effectively saying, I'm not going to give you anything else. It's now up to you to move these talks on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much of a threat, really, is it? But I think that the thing that what the UK side is hoping for is that you start to see some splits in the EU position. Michel Barnier has been very, very clear that he wants movement on citizens' rights, he wants movement on Northern Ireland, he wants movement on the settlement payment. Actually, to be honest with you, if the UK offered £100 billion more in a settlement payment, they wouldn't be quibbling over citizens' rights, right? It's all about it's all about the money for the EU. They've got budget holes to fill.
Even Northern Ireland?
Even you can't solve Northern Ireland until you decide what the post-Brexit deal is anyway.
Yeah.
Northern Ireland thing is a complete red herring. I don't know why we're really putting the cart before the horse on that one. And I think that what they're hoping is that if you just play this game, that some of the EU countries will eventually say, OK, we need to move on to the trade deal now. OK, Barnier, you might not think we need to, but we need to start moving on because we don't want this hard Brexit either.
Well, interestingly, Kate, Denmark's Finance Minister Christian Jensen tonight saying that he thinks it needs to be a more speedy process, and he says both sides should be ready to move the talks on to the next phase now. So is she starting to split people in the EU 27?
Possibly, and I think those comments are completely right. Roughly 70% of the British public now wants these negotiations to move forward. They want the process to happen. It doesn't mean that 70% is on board with Brexit completely, but are frustrated by the fact that this is going to become the political story of essentially the next decade. And I think the stalling that we saw in Brussels, the vote that they had last week saying, very strange vote, we want to halt negotiations until there's a big breakthrough. Well, you can't have a breakthrough without continuing with the negotiations. There has been some decent progress on citizens' rights. Like Owen says, this issue with Ireland isn't going to make itself very clear until there's more of a deal on the table. And the UK has laid out the baseline for a divorce bill. It's put down $20 billion. It's very likely to go up from there, but they have at least come up with a number. So it probably is time for the EU to start getting more on board with having these discussions.
Do you think it's going to happen this month, though, Owen? The October deadline that we keep hearing about, are they going to get that bill sorted?
I don't think they're going to get sorted this month because I think that both sides still need to act like there's been some kind of negotiation. So the EU needs to act like they've dragged money out of us. We need to look like we've managed to beat them down $100 billion. And if you do it nicely with the deadline, they'll go, this is a bit too easy. So it needs to have a little bit of the drama in it. Because actually, when it comes to the time needed to do the actual Brexit trade deal, that can be very, very quickly because we start from a position of regulatory equivalence anyway, which is always the big problem, isn't it, with these trade deals. We start from that position of equality anyway. So the trade deal itself isn't going to take that long, which is another reason why I think they're dragging this out. This is all, I think it's quite a lot of theatrics going on.
And it's such a myth that a trade deal has to be perfect in and of itself before it's implemented. I mean, countries throughout the world trade with each other without actually having a trade deal in place. It's not the ideal for the UK and the EU, but if they can agree on, say, 80% of things and go into a trade deal in that capacity, they can figure out the other 20% as the years go on, especially in that transition period.
The UK, so the EU and Japan trade deal was an example where they haven't done everything, but they've got the outline of it and they've got the basics, yeah.
How many years did that take, though?
I'm not sure. I don't think it was that long, was it? It was a couple of years.
So there is some sort of precedent.
Yeah.
Let's talk, going back into page 2 of The Sun, about SNP conference up in Glasgow today. And the headline on the sidebar there, Surgeon Indie Ref 2 delusion. The SNP have a bit of a problem, don't they, Kate, with kind of what do they do now?
They've lost 21 seats in June, so they're not coming from the same position that they were in previously. The referendum was only in 2015. We're not far away from that. And Nicola Sturgeon has a problem up in Scotland where her party stands for independence. She is still the leader. She has to make that case to her base and her core supporters, but it doesn't look like Scotland wants it at the moment. So how do you balance continuing with what your party stands for without seeming like a bit of a bully on the other side, trying to force people back into yet another referendum? It's been a very political few years, and actually a lot of people around the dinner table, especially up in Scotland, who've seen so much of this, don't want to be discussing politics day in and day out. I think that she has recognized that to some extent, but when she does speak generally about having another referendum, she's going to have pushback, and it's going to be stronger than it ever has been before.
But Owen, does she just need to maybe tone it down for a little while and see how Brexit pans out? Because if it starts looking like it's going bad, they just jump on it again and say this is a way for us to stay in the EU.
Absolutely. I think that her big mistake was, 2 months before the general election, saying that she wanted another Scottish referendum and she was looking at these different time periods, before the UK leaves the EU. And then Theresa May called this election. Actually, that kind of completely knocked the wind out of her sails. And now we don't really hear much talk about this Indie Ref 2, as they're calling it. So I think politically she was kind of outplayed by Theresa May there. She needs to fire up that kind of feeling, that kind of momentum again. Yes, they still won the most amount of seats in Scotland, but it was down. They did lose 21, so the trajectory is going down. So it's hard to make out that you're still on the way up, because obviously they're not.
It's also very hard for her to make out, honestly, that they could continue to be a member of the EU. That's
completely illogical.
Yeah,
It's
that's not
ridiculous,
guaranteed in any way, and the EU has not suggested that they can. So
people can see through that. People aren't stupid. People can see through that. In the same way they could see through in the Scottish independence referendum, they didn't know what the currency was going to be and all this kind of stuff. People will see through. If you're saying vote for independence and we'll be part of the single market, people are going to go, well, how does that work?
You sure? Yeah.
How do you think the other parties up in Scotland will react to this? Labour and the Conservatives mainly. Conservatives had this resurgence in the general election. Labour are looking for a new leader up there as well. How do they look at what's happening with the SNP and how do they react?
Well, Ruth Davidson came out this morning, I believe, and said very strongly that her number one priority is keeping the union intact within the UK. It's UK first for her and Brexit second, and that would suggest that the Conservative Party up in Scotland really thinks that its core support is coming from unionists, from people who desire to keep the UK intact. So I think that tells us a lot about where they're coming from, and a reason why Sturgeon is going to see more and more pushback. Ruth Davidson in particular up in Scotland has more support than the Tories have seen in a very, very long time. So for her to take that support and move it to a unionist point, it's going to be hard for Sturgeon to fight against that.
And Owen, Labour?
The problem that Labour had is they've said famously, it was treated like a branch office in Scotland for too long. Which something which the Tories don't seem to have that problem. The Tories do seem to have their own image, run their own campaigns up there. I thought Kezia Dugdale seems to do quite well, actually. But I saw today a Labour MP tweeting that it was, why was Ruth Davidson and all the Sunday shows, why not the Labour Scottish leader? Well, there isn't a Scottish leader of the Labour Party yet. So they need to get their house in order. And if they don't, then they're going to lose momentum. They did quite well. They did best than expected in the general election in Scotland, of course. But with Kezia Dugdale going, it just seems to be falling back again, and they're just not part of the conversation, it seems.
OK, we're going to take a short break, but still to come, we're going to tell you why you need to spend your old pound coins quickly. Back after this. Welcome back to the press preview. Still with me, Owen Bennett and Kate Andrews. Let's talk about the front page of the FT. The German finance minister, Owen, basically sounding a warning. What's he saying? Yeah,
this is not the sexiest of stories, but it's quite a dire warning, actually. It's basically the outgoing German finance chief has said that because we've been pumping so much money into the economy since the crash, we're basically not learning the mistakes of what we did beforehand. We know how interest rates are really low across the West, across Germany and the UK, not so much in Southern Europe. We know that it's very easy to get credit, and as a result, we've not really learnt the lessons of the crash, and the economy is basically at risk of falling apart in exactly the same way again. If people start defaulting on their payments, defaulting on their mortgages, defaulting on their credit cards, we could be heading for another 2008 style crash. The question is, how do you get out of it? Now, governments usually, one way of stimulating the economy is to make currency cheap by printing loads of money. The other way is to invest lots of money into the economy, and that's what the government doesn't seem to be doing, because they're desperately trying to get their own sort of their own deficits, their own finances in order, their own debt down. So it is quite a warning, and coming from someone who steered the German economy through this era, to hear him sort of warn about this, I think people should listen to him, but I can't see it really changing at the moment.
Well, it's deeply concerning that the majority of Western countries are still running very high deficits. Spending is not under control. For all the talk of austerity, and it's not very helpful usually to compare government to business, but in this particular case, I think it is. If a business were going through tough times, you would expect them to take on an austerity approach. If they were operating under that policy 7 or 10 years later, people would say there's something very wrong here. And the fact that the UK government is still operating under austerity does seem like something is fundamentally wrong. The reality is that spending is still not under control. Debt is being racked up, as it's pointed out here, personally and also in the public sphere. And if another recession were to come and we were to be hit, it'd be incredibly painful, because it's hard to see actually where the government could go from there. It's already, it's racking up deficits now. It's not being responsible now.
Exactly. Alistair Darling said that when post-crash, all this kind of printing of money, quantitative easing, was only ever going to be a short-term solution.
It's supposed to be a short-term.
We've become addicted to it as a nation. You can tell looking at the low interest rates, and they've pulled all the levers they can. There is nothing left in the tank.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be too depressed on a Sunday night, but it is quite worrying that there is nothing here to help us if we fall here.
But I mean, speaking of that, with a warning like that coming, someone like Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, our Chancellor, what could he do? What options does he have?
Well,
We've got a budget coming up, don't we?
This is what's so difficult is now that all of the parties really see leadership up for grabs. They're all making very big spending promises. They're all trying to appeal to the electorate, we won't cut this, we will spend that. Jeremy Corbyn will bring back free tuition fees, but he also won't touch the triple lock on pensions. No one is being very fiscally responsible. Philip Hammond, the Chancellor's basically said that he's kicking financial responsibility down the road to the next government, that he's not going to tackle austerity anymore. So it's really concerning.
You could stimulate the economy in other ways, couldn't you? You could stimulate the economy.
There are multiple ways to stimulate the economy, but 7 years after a crash, as we've just pointed out, to continue to be racking up deficits like this isn't very responsible.
OK, let's turn to something completely different. The front page of The Sun, Ryanair's scare down at the bottom there. Ryanair, they cancelled, of course, thousands of flights this coming winter a few weeks ago. This is something a bit different, Owen. What have their pilots been up to? Is it pilots or engineers?
These are people checking out, doing safety checks on the airplanes, and there's been some pictures released of them doing crazy things like drawing each other's faces. I mean, The Sun have really sold this as a kind of fury airline kind of thing, but actually, when you look into the safety engineers at hijinks, it even says there is no suggestion passenger and crew safety have been compromised by the hijinks. So it's things like they've sort of cling filming themselves to tables and it's a bit immature.
It is a relief that nobody's safety's been put at risk.
They're not taking wings off planes.
Right, no, you can't help but laugh, but if I were to look out a plane and see someone who's supposed to be working on ground suspended in midair,
they're not doing it while the people are on the plane. They're not like loading passengers up and
it's great to suspend yourself in midair sometimes. Like, why not? But perhaps maybe not the right atmosphere to
Indeed.
do so.
Let's look quickly. Telegraph. Is it the Telegraph? £1 coin chaos. It's their headline story. I was looking for it down the bottom, but there it is on the left.
What do you need to know?
Yes, Kate, tell us what's happening.
The Royal Mint is trying to bring the old £1 coins back in, out of use, and they're reaching out to small businesses and trying to stop them from circulating it. Small businesses are very concerned, of course, when their customers come in and want to use their old £1 coins, that there's going to be absolute chaos in the lines as people won't be able to use their money. It's not too bad. It looks here like there's no rule preventing shops from accepting it. They just can't give it back out once they have accepted it. So it's going to be difficult for the shop owners, but hopefully they can still be kind to their consumers and accept the pound coins. You're always going to have this flux when you're trying to introduce a new kind of currency. It should be all right.
I mean, surely the headline contradicts itself. Pound coin chaos as shops defy deadline. Surely it would be chaos if shops implemented the deadline, because the fact that they're not going to abide by this deadline means there's going to be no chaos.
No one likes semantics. Let's very, very quickly. This is an amazing story, so I want to make sure we fit it in. Angelina Jolie involved in a honey trap plot to capture who?
To capture Ugandan warlord Joseph Kony. Apparently, she offered to invite him to dinner, whereby that he could then be arrested, according to the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor. He asked the actress to act as bait, and apparently Angelina Jolie was up for it, but then
not surprised.
The plan did not go ahead. No other explanation.
No.
It sounds like an next kind of Argo film, doesn't it? This is amazing.
And this was back, was it that video, the Kony 2012? So this is several years ago.
Kony 2012 was the campaign, yes, when this warlord really started to get more international attention. Apparently got the attention of Angelina Jolie. We need more.
I think
the public needs to know more.
I think we should use A-listers bait a lot more. I think this is the way we go.
Well, there's a lot more to that story. Unfortunately, we don't have the time for it. But Kate and Owen will be back with us in the next hour, so join us then. For now, let's see what the weather's doing.